The book of Exodus, chapter 14, verse 13 says, Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." That is a very remarkable story, one we all love. It speaks to the profound work of God in delivering the Israelites not only from slavery, but also from the pursuit of the enemy. You know, sometimes we go through life feeling as though something is relentlessly chasing us, intent on causing us harm. I don't know what it is that you feel is pursuing you. Just like the Israelites felt Pharaoh's army coming after them, it won't catch up with you. It won't destroy you. God will grant you victory. In our world today, it's not always easy to keep our faith, especially when times get tough. You might find yourself in a tough spot where it feels like your prayers are going unanswered and life seems to be getting worse, not better. It can be even harder when you see others having a great time, while you're just there, not achieving anything, stagnant. You might ask yourself, is it even possible to keep believing in a bigger plan when everything seems to be going against me? But there's a perspective that offers hope in these challenging moments. It's the idea that we're all part of something greater, looked after by a power that is above all powers, who deeply cares for us. It's a belief in the premise that each one of us is etched in the palm of divine providence, in God's care, as evidenced by verses from the book of Isaiah chapter 49 and the book of Hebrews chapter 6. Even when the world is pushing you to take the reins, telling you it's all in your hands, remember this: you're not alone. Your life is not only about your decisions, but it's also intertwined with God's plan. And sticking to this belief, despite the world telling you otherwise, is a brave act of faith. Maybe you are sitting there right now looking at your life or situation, and it seems nothing is happening. I want you to know, without any shadow of doubt, that even in that moment when it feels like nothing is happening, God is still working in the background. Remember what He has said in His Word over every child of His. He has a plan for our destinies, and though it may not look like it right now, that plan is to do good. I don't know how. I can't even say I know what He is doing exactly. But allow me to encourage you with these words. Dare to keep believing God. Do you know that even before you started believing Him, God already had you in mind? He had already begun working things out to save you, even while you were yet to come to Him. Think about that for a moment. The Bible says that even while you and I were still sinners, Christ died for us. God gave up His Son to save you, even before you acknowledged Him in your life. Before you stepped towards Him, He was already running towards you. Before you called out to Him, He had stretched out His hands towards you. Now think for a moment. If He went this far to save you, do you think He would do all that to leave you the way you are, or where you are right now? Apostle Paul said in the book of Romans chapter 8, verse 32, "He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, how will He not also along with Him graciously give us all things?" Many times we forget this very important information, but I am glad you are seeing this today. Be reminded, even when it doesn't look like it, God is still working. When it seems you have been applying for the job and no one wants to employ you, God is still working on your behalf. When it seems like you've been working and working, giving it your best, and no one seems to appreciate or even recognize you, God is still working. When it seems like your life is characterized by failure everywhere you turn, God is still working on your behalf. Listen, you don't need to understand all the details. Find strength in these words. God will never fail you. Even if it looks like He has, He never will. In moments when it feels like you've been left out in the cold, deserted by those you once held dear, friends, family, and well-wishers, remember that God is still working. It can be a painful experience to feel alone, especially when life's trials seem too immense to handle single-handedly. Yet this is the exact time when God is operating behind the scenes, crafting a masterful plans of your life that's beyond your current comprehension. Understandable, it might be tough for you to understand what is going on, but I want you to know this one thing. God is still working on you, for you. It's human nature to yearn for an instant understanding of the circumstances we face, to search for a pattern or a reason behind the chaos. But the divine plan often eludes our immediate comprehension. You may not see it now, but every challenge, every failure is a stepping stone towards an end you cannot foresee. Even when it feels like the world is falling apart around you, remember that God is constructing something beautiful out of the rubble. It may seem like a paradox, but it's in these very moments of apparent failure and solitude that God's work becomes most profound. Take heart. Even when it appears as if God has failed you, He never has and He never will. Can you imagine yourself in Joseph's shoes? Imagine yourself with all your dreams and visions and goals running through life, with the excitement of achieving them all. And then, like a pack of cards, everything comes crashing down. Imagine how Joseph must have felt when his own brothers were planning to obliterate him before they finally agreed to sell him into slavery. Consider yourself in the shoes of Joseph, a young man who once enjoyed the privileges of being his father's favorite son, practically living like royalty. Suddenly, he found himself torn from his comfort zone, sold into slavery in a distant and foreign land. He was completely isolated, with no means of reaching out to his family. You'd certainly feel abandoned, forsaken, and utterly alone in such a dire situation. And just when Joseph seemed to be adapting to his new life, rising through the ranks in his master's house, he was unjustly accused by his master's wife and abruptly thrown into prison, no questions asked. Yet this very same Joseph, despite his circumstances, was resolute in his devotion to God. He resisted the advances of Potiphar's wife out of respect for his master and, above all, his reverence for God. The book of Genesis chapter 39, verses 7 through 9 bear witness to his integrity. Even in the face of temptation, he declared, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" It seems paradoxical, doesn't it? He was unyielding in his loyalty to God, yet his life appeared to be in complete turmoil. Where was God when he was wrongfully condemned? Why didn't God shield him from these trials? These questions would undoubtedly cloud our minds, particularly if we are impatient, expecting life to unfold as per our plans. However, if we examine Joseph's life story carefully, from its genesis through the turbulent middle to the eventual end, it becomes evident that God was omnipresent. God was with him, even in his master's house, showering favor upon him and ensuring his endeavors were successful. Despite his status as a slave, Joseph flourished. Unlike other servants who might have been subjected to severe hardships, Joseph's life turns out different. He was imprisoned instead of facing a possibly worse fate. Why? Because Joseph was moving in sync with God's plan. God was subtly orchestrating his life in the background. Everything in Joseph's life was aligned with this divine blueprint. Everything was proceeding according to a celestial plan. Listen. It was no coincidence that Joseph got incarcerated in the royal prison. It was no coincidence that Pharaoh's servants offended him, and he had them thrown into the same royal prison where Joseph was being held. It was no coincidence that both had a problem in that prison that only Joseph could solve. It was also no coincidence that Joseph's interpretation was spot on and happened just like he said it would. Remember, even when it doesn't look like it, God is still working. You must dare to keep believing. After all that happened, everything went back to the way they used to be. The servant was set free, and he forgot Joseph. I would like to believe that God allowed him to forget. Why? Because, according to his plans, if they released Joseph at once, he would not occupy the position God was preparing him for. Maybe he would become another servant, and God had something else in mind. Joseph was not meant to be a servant all his life. It was his destiny to rule, and everything was already in motion to bring him to that destiny. So God made the servant forget Joseph for a while. It may have felt painful to help someone and be forgotten. But don't forget, God is still working. Don't conclude on your destiny when God hasn't. Dare to believe him no matter what. Every trial Joseph endured, every injustice he faced, was a stepping stone leading him closer to this destiny. There were periods when it seemed as though he had been forgotten, times when he extended help only to be overlooked. But remember, even in the silence, even in the waiting, God was still working. Let us not rush to draw conclusions about our destiny when God, the master planner, hasn't unveiled the full picture. It requires faith, courage, and patience to believe in his divine timing, even amidst the uncertainty. I don't know what you are going through or where you are right now. However, I want to plead with you. Do not stop believing God. It is not your job to figure out how God answers or will answer you. It is not your job to know when he will answer you. He has given you one job, and that is to just believe. Jesus said in the book of Mark, chapter 5, verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe. Don't stop believing." God is still healing the sick, dear child of God. Don't stop believing this. God is still raising the dead back to life. Don't stop believing this. God is still changing stories from shame to honor. Don't stop believing. God is still turning lives around. What do you need to do? Keep believing. If you will keep believing, you will reach the finish line. If you are struggling with believing God at the season of your life, I would like to encourage you to ask for his help right now. If your faith feels shaky during these tough times, it's perfectly okay to ask for a little divine backup. God's always there, ready to lend a hand and strengthen your faith. Just remember, the secret to weathering the storm isn't about knowing when it will end, but trusting that it will. So hold on tight to your faith. If you stay the course and keep your belief strong, you won't just make it through the challenges, you'll come out stronger on the other side. Keep this thought close to your heart as you forge ahead. Keep believing, because your faith is what fuels your strength and resilience.